She watched him in the rear-view mirror as she drove away, and I listened to her try to stifle her sobs. I took her hand in mine and felt how hard she was shaking. "Pull over," I told her gently. "I can drive," she said, trying to regain her composure. I wouldn't argue with her, sure that would just upset her more, but I also knew she wasn't in any condition to drive. In one swift motion I reached over and pulled her across my lap, changing to the driver's seat. "You wouldn't be able to find the house," I explained in my most soothing voice. I listened while her breathing returned to normal, and just as she started to relax, headlights came up too fast on us. With a gasp she turned to stare out the back window, terrified. "It's just Alice," I told her, reaching out for her hand again. I squeezed it gently, trying to assure her we had things under control. Her heart settled, but somehow its steady beat did nothing to calm my nerves. "The tracker?" she asked, quick as ever to figure things out. "He heard the end of your performance," I admitted. "Charlie," she gasped, a new wave of panic entering her voice. "The tracker followed us. He's running behind us now." I would have been listening to his thoughts, but they weren't giving me anything useful. He was so focused on the hunt on the kill there was little logic or planning going on. He only had one thought, and I knew all too well what it was. "Can we outrun him?" she asked, and I decided that there was no point in downplaying the situation. She needed to know the truth, as painful as it was to admit. No, instinctively I drove faster, pushing her truck to its limit and wishing we were in one of my family's other cars. Not that it would do any good, really. James was as fast as he was stubborn. Bella watched as Alice followed us, and I hoped she could feel the strength of our numbers and 131, the determination of everyone involved not to let any harm come to her. After a few silent moments I felt the truck buckle slightly under Emmett's weight. Before I could explain, Bella was screaming and I cursed my brother under my breath for not having given any warning. I reached out to put my fingers against Bella's shrieking lips. "It's Emmett," I assured her as her chest rose and fell in panicked gasps. With a fresh wave of guilt sweeping over me, I wrapped my arm around Bella's waist and tried to think of some way to comfort her. I wished we had the luxury of time so I could pull over and press her against me, rocking her and singing to her until all her fears were gone. With a sigh, I decided I would have to settle for trying to distract her with a bit of teasing. "I didn't realize you were still so bored with small-town life. It seemed like you were adjusting fairly well, especially recently. Maybe I was just flattering myself that I was making life more interesting for you." I smiled at her and tried to make my voice light and casual, give her a few moments away from the nightmare that was chasing us. "I wasn't being nice," she said, refusing to meet my gaze. That was the same thing my mom said when she left him. You could day I was hitting below the belt. I instantly hated myself for my stupid attempt at distraction. The sadness and regret in her voice told me I'd only made things worse. "Don't worry. He'll forgive you," I said softly, smiling as her eyes met mine. They held a different kind of fear than what I'd been witnessing since the moment the nomads showed up. She was truly afraid she had ruined her relationship with her father. With all her endless ability to forgive, she couldn't see that he would have the same level of forgiveness for her. "Bella, it's going to be all right," I promised. "But it won't be all right when I'm not with you," she said shakily, making my heart tighten in my chest. With Bella beside me and my arm tightly locked around her waist, it was so easy to forget that in less than an hour we'd be countless miles apart. Not since my initial fleeing to Denali had I been more than a short hunting trip's distance away from Bella. And since I'd realized how deeply I love her, I'd hunted mostly in the park just outside the city, unwilling even to make the journey to our usual more distant locations. The thought of having hundreds of miles between us was nearly unbearable. "We'll be together again in a few days," I said, trying to comfort both Bella and myself. I pulled her closer to me, as if locking her in my embrace now would prevent the inevitable separation that was looming over us. "Don't forget that this was your idea," I added, trying to smile through the pain. "It was the best idea, of course it was mine," she said, sounding almost like herself. I knew it was an act, but I appreciated that she was making as much effort as I was to try to keep things feeling normal as best we could. I offered her one more tentative smile, though of course she saw right through me. "Why did this happen?" she asked. And it sounded like another sob was threatening to escape her. Why me? She might as well have asked what did I do. And the thought of Bella blaming herself yet again for my carelessness made me loathe myself even more. It's my fault, I was a fool to expose you like that. 132. That's not what I meant, she said, her voice hesitating just a moment before she continued. I was there, big deal. It didn't bother the other two. Why did this James decide to kill me? There are people all over the place, why me? I thought about what she was asking and cringed at how similar it was to when she had inquired as to why I said I was more dangerous to her than to other humans. In essence, it did boil down to the powerful lure of her scent, though obviously she had no control over that. It was Bella that drew him in, but it was myself who set him off. Everything about my stance in the field told him one thing. She belongs to me. I got a good look at his mind tonight. I'm not sure if there's anything I could have done to avoid this, once he saw you. It is partially your fault, I said, trying to make my voice light and teasing. If you didn't smell so appallingly luscious, he might not have bothered. But when I defended you, well, that made it a lot worse. He's not used to being thwarted. No matter how insignificant the object. He thinks of himself as a hunter and nothing else. His existence is consumed with tracking, and a challenge is all he asks of life. Suddenly we've presented him with a beautiful challenge, a large clan of strong fighters all bent on protecting the one vulnerable element. You wouldn't believe how euphoric he is now. It's his favorite game, and we've just made it his most exciting game ever. James was the absolute worst of our kind, a creature who gave merit to all the horrific stories humans created about us. He enjoyed violence, craved the fight, and above all thirsted for blood without any regard to the life attached to it. The fact that we were running from him, that Bella was still alive, was proof of the inarguable strength our family showed. But if I had stood by, he would have killed you right then. I added quietly, unwilling to hide the truth from Bella but unable to meet her stare. I thought, I didn't smell the same to the others as I do to you. She whispered. Of course it wasn't the same. My hands clenched into fists around the steering wheel at the thought of what it would have meant if she had called to James the way she called to me. Though it was the last thing I wanted to think of at that precise moment. I couldn't help my mind wandering back to that first terrible day. The way Bella's blood assaulted me, strangled me and pulled me in. You don't, I said quickly. Not wanting to waste precious moments with Bella dwelling on the past that didn't matter. But that doesn't mean that you aren't still a temptation to every one of them. If you had appealed to the tracker or any of them the same way you appeal to me, it would have meant a fight right there. I watched as Bella's body shook with a wave of fear and all I could think was, I can never let her be afraid again. Though I knew I'd been trying to find some way around it, that shiver coursing through her veins was all it took to get me on board with Emmett's line of thinking. I don't think I have any choice but to kill him now, I said sadly. Carlyle won't like it. I didn't know what reaction I was expecting, but I was surprised when Bella calmly asked, how can you kill a vampire? She sounded inquisitive, her tone reminiscent to when she was learning about my life and my family. It was as if she were asking merely out of curiosity rather than discussing how to destroy the predator who was stalking her. I watched her, baffled as ever, but reminded myself that this was no time to hide the truth. It was not easy to kill our kind, but I knew we would all do whatever was necessary, and I tried to give her that assurance by saying it as plainly as I could. 133. The only way to be sure is to tear him to shreds, and then burn the pieces. She showed no reaction. Didn't hesitate for a second before adding, and the other two will fight with him, the woman will. I'm not sure about Laurent. They don't have a very strong bond, he's only with them for convenience. He was embarrassed by James in the meadow, but James and the woman, they'll try to kill you. Her voice broke at the word and I was overtaken again by how undeserving I was of her love. Pure and perfect even as her life was in danger. Bella, don't you dare waste time worrying about me. Your only concern is keeping yourself safe and please trying not to be reckless. Is he still following? Yes. He won't attack the house, though. Not tonight. James was determined and in his mind, failure was not an option. He'd never dream of taking us on while we were on our own land. He would observe and plan. And for that I was grateful I hadn't let on to my particular ability. I hoped I would get all the insight we'd need to defeat him simply by listening. I allowed myself one peaceful moment as we pulled up to our house. My sanctuary for so many years, it had never looked more wonderful than in that moment. I didn't let myself think about the goodbye I would have to say within those walls, but instead focused on the only thing that truly mattered. Bella was with us, and at least for that moment, she was in the safest place in the world. As the truck slowed, I heard Emmett's thoughts race full gear into the protective big brother tone I'd started to get used to and deeply appreciated. Keep watch, check with Alice for any changes. I'll get Bella inside. Don't worry. We've got this. He's not going to try anything on our turf. I watched Emmett hold Bella protectively against his chest, running faster than I'd ever seen him move until they were safely inside. I looked at Alice with weary eyes, as if the pleading could make her tell me something encouraging. He's close, but I don't see him attacking until he's got her alone. Until, I whispered frantically. Quietly, she reminded me. All I'm saying is that's his plan. That's what he sees himself doing. But you and I both know Bella is not going to be left alone for an instant, so there isn't a problem. Now hurry inside. Bella's going to need you to be strong for this. We were at their side before Emmett had set Bella down. I tore my eyes from Bella's nervous expression and saw Laurent standing among my assembled family members. Emmett was growling at him as he placed Bella back at my side. I allowed myself one brief moment to revel in the warmth and joy of having her near enough again that our skin was touching, then focused on Laurent. He's tracking us. I snapped angrily. I was afraid of that. What have I brought on this family because of my foolish curiosity? My glare softened only slightly as I realized Laurent's guilt over the situation. He'd never intended to cause any trouble for us, and clearly James was an unstoppable force that even his companion could not control. 134. I watched as Alice closed the gap between her and Jasper, and whispered too low for Bella to hear that time was running short and they needed to pack a few things before leaving. Rosalie heard her and rushed to Emmett's side, understanding that there were only minutes left before they too would be parted. Her thoughts turned icy as she glared at Bella. Can't believe I have to let Emmett fight for some human just because yet another stupid vampire can't seem to leave her alone. Edward, so help me, you owe me forever for this. I snarled under my breath, and she forced her thoughts to turn back to Emmett. In an uncharacteristically vulnerable moment, I felt the concern that washed through her. She'd been channeling all her energy into being angry with Bella, but underneath it all, she was worried about Emmett's safety. What will he do? Carlyle asked. I turned back to Laurent and we all watched him carefully. I'm sorry. I was afraid, when your boy there defended her, that it would set him off. Can you stop him? Nothing stops James when he gets started. He sighed, shaking his head. It is a fight to the death now, and one I will not be a part of. I would have been furious at Laurent's eagerness to bow out, but in truth I knew it was not his fight and I couldn't blame him for acting out of self-preservation. We'll stop him, Emmett said firmly. Edward, don't let him get to you. James doesn't stand a chance against us. You can't bring him down. Laurent persisted, and I felt the sureness of the statement echoed in his mind as he thought through James's previous conquests. I've never seen anything like him in my 300 years. He's absolutely lethal. That's why I joined his coven. I heard Bella gasp almost imperceptibly as she realized James was the true leader of their group, something I'd understood from the callous disregard he'd shown Laurent in the field. Laurent eyed Bella wearily, shaking his head and recalling some of the more gruesome ways he'd seen James kill. How many will die to save the girl? They do not understand what they face. He looked at Carlyle and coldly asked, "Are you sure it's worth it?" The growl I let rip through my chest and throat silenced every one of Laurent's thoughts. He took a step back, fearful, as he was right to be. It took all my strength not to lunge at him, but Bella's presence reminded me it was not he who I truly wished to fight. He may not understand our love, but he was not the enemy who threatened our happiness. I'm afraid you're going to have to make a choice, Carlyle told Laurent solemnly. His eyes softened as he looked at each of our faces. Marvelous creatures. This family, he thought, eyes taking in all of us and the home we'd built for ourselves. I never thought it possible for our kind to live in a way that feels so human. I'm intrigued by the life you've created here, he finally said. But I won't get in the middle of this. I bear none of you any enmity, but I won't go up against James. I think I will head north to that clan in Denali. I don't know that I will be strong enough to conform to this way of life, but I have been inspired to try. Don't underestimate James, he added. He's got a brilliant mind and unparalleled senses. He's every bit as comfortable in the human world as you seem to be, and he won't come at you head-on. I'm sorry for what's been unleashed here. Truly sorry. He bowed his head to us and glanced once more at Bella. 135. She must be a very remarkable girl, to have elicited such strong emotions. Though I was certain Laurent hadn't figured out my ability to read him mind, somehow his final thought sounded like a direct apology to me. I abhor the thought of having upset the life you've created. May the united front of this family keep your lives intact. Go in peace. Carlyle said calmly. We watched as Laurent took one final look at our family, then flew out the door. There was a certain finality to the sound of the door closing behind him, the last excuse for not setting our plan in motion gone. How close? Carlyle asked, his eyes locking intensely with mine. I listened for several moments while I located James's already familiar voice again. He was confident, certain of his and Victoria's success, and he was anxious to get started. About 3 miles out past the river. He's circling around to meet up with the female. What's the plan? We'll lead him off, and then Jasper and Alice will run her south, and then… Carlyle was trying to keep his thoughts focused, his concern solely for Bella's safety, but I knew what he was truly asking. He wanted to know if we would need to kill James. As soon as Bella is clear, we hunt him. I tried to infuse my voice with a sense of command, though it pained me to force Carlyle into something I knew he hated. Still, I needed him to understand that in this case it was the only way. I guess there's no other choice. He conceded. If we leave him alive, he'll just come back for her later. I was grateful for his acceptance. Knowing how difficult it was for him to admit, and I silently vowed to do everything in my power to never put him in that position again. Get her upstairs and trade clothes. I said to Rosalie, hoping for once she would just listen. Of course, nothing having to do with Rose was ever that simple. You have got to be kidding me. Just because you think she smells all sweet and delicious doesn't mean I want her stench any closer to me than necessary. I hardened my expression, trying to convey that I wasn't giving her a choice. Why should I? She asked, her words sharp and biting. What is she to me? Expect a menace, a danger you've chosen to inflict on all of us, Rose, Emmett said softly, touching her shoulder gently and trying to reason with her. She shied away from his touch, eyes still glaring into mine. I'm letting Emmett fight by your side. You don't have any right to ask more of me than that. And as much as I hated to admit it, she was right. I had no right to ask any of them to fight for Bella, yet there they were. My entire family was putting their lives in danger to protect the fragile human who held my heart. Esme, I asked, turning to her, thankful for her reassuring smile. Of course, she said without a moment's hesitation. In an instant, Esme had lifted Bella into her arms. They were up the stairs and out of sight before Bella could react. How are you, son? Carlyle asked gently, my eyes lingering on the spot Bella had been standing seconds before. 136. Terrified, I admitted, any sense of pride or attempt to hide me fears long past. Everything will work out. You and Emmett are strong, capable fighters, and though I loathe the thought, I will fight right along beside you until James is finished. What if we're wrong and he doesn't follow us? What if he gets to her and I'm not there? I asked, suddenly completely unsure of the supposedly brilliant plan we'd created. The thought of not having Bella with me, of not being completely sure of her safety at any given moment, felt too difficult to bear. James will follow us. He will believe Bella is with you, and even if he eventually realizes he's being deceived, he will have no way of knowing where Alice and Jasper have taken her. Her scent will be masked long enough for them to leave the area safely, and she'll be in another state long before he realizes he's been fooled. I nodded slowly, willing myself to believe. It sounded good in theory, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my being separated from Bella was a horrible mistake. She and I made each other strong. Our love somehow created reason out of chaos, and I felt like without her beside me, nothing would make sense anymore. Edward. Alice will see if something goes wrong and she and Jasper will get her to safety. Emmett assured me. Don't ever forget that Alice is always one step ahead. Bella's in good hands with her. She loves her almost as much as you do, though in a far less nauseating way. He added, his voice once again teasing. I attempted a smile, though I still couldn't feel anything but fear. Each of our groups will have a cell phone. Check them often, and we'll report any changes or updates. Emmett, go grab anything you might need. Carlyle trailed off, still not willing to think about the actual act of killing James. Emmett nodded and rushed out of the room. When Carlyle spoke again, his voice was soft but severe. Edward, I need you to do something, and I know it will be difficult. You're very afraid, but I want you to fill Bella with every ounce of confidence you can muster. You'll have just a few moments with her, and I want you two to part both feeling sure of our success. Stand confident and sure. Bella will be watching you closely. You know she fears for your safety, but you have the ability to calm those fears by hiding your own. Let her know in any way you can that this will all be over soon. I say this not only for her sake, but for ours as well. Emmett and I need you to be completely focused, and this is the best way I can think of to ensure that happens. I nodded, believing in my gut that he was right. I couldn't let Bella's last image of my face be one filled with fear. Our time apart would be as difficult for her as it was for me, and I couldn't spend my time worrying about how scared she was. I had to show her there was nothing to be afraid of, then from the moment we left the house. I needed my every thought to be focused on James. Emmett strolled calmly back into the room just as Esme and Alice were bringing Bella downstairs. She wobbled a little as they let go of her, but I suppressed the urge to rush to her side. Focus on the plan. Confidence. I knew as soon as I held her, the walls would come crashing down and she would see through me the way she always did. I had to save our goodbye for the last possible second. Carlyle gave Esme and Alice their phones, then smiled warmly at Bella. Esme and Rosalie will be taking your truck. Bella, don't remind me. Rosalie thought viciously, glaring at Carlyle. 137. Alice. Jasper, take the Mercedes. You'll need the dark tint in the south. They nodded and he added. We're taking the Jeep. I couldn't understand why, but Bella's heart seemed to speed up at that. Was it all finally sinking in? She'd been handling everything so well, and in that moment I realized her calm attitude was the only thing giving me the strength to leave. If she fell apart now, if she let me see how truly frightened she was, I wasn't sure I'd be able to leave her. Alice, will they take the bait? Carlyle asked, thankfully interrupting my concern. She closed her eyes and I felt a quick surge of comfort at her peaceful expression. I listened to her mind closely and was grateful to see there were no signs of anything veering off track. The plan seemed flawless as she saw James take every piece of bait we would set for him. He'll track you, she assured me, opening her eyes and looking deeply into mine. You've seen it too now. You know everything is as it should be. The woman will follow the truck. We should be able to leave after that. Let's go. Carlyle said, and I knew the moment I'd been dreading had arrived. I flew across the room to Bella, finally giving in to the need to be close to her. I wondered if she knew how difficult it had been for me to keep my distance, or if she could ever understand the reasons why it was necessary. I was falling apart on the inside, and touching her, feeling her heartbeat against me, was quickly crumbling the last of my will. I wrapped my arms around her, filling myself with her perfect scent, memorizing every inch of her body and the way it shaped itself around mine when I held her. I brushed my fingertips across her soft, warm cheeks. I lifted her up to me until we could both feel the other's breath against each of our faces, then kissed her with more intensity than I'd ever allowed myself. I cherished the burn in my throat I'd once been afraid of, breathing her in until everything inside me ached. It was the sweetest torture I'd ever felt. I knew if I stayed any longer I'd lose the courage to walk out the door, so I lowered her feet back to the ground, one hand still caressing her cheek. Remembering what Carlyle had told me, I attempted to fill my stare with the certainty of my return. I knew if I spoke she would hear the agony in my voice, so I remained silent. Wishing for once that she could read my mind. I repeated one thing over and over and hoped at least she could read it in my eyes. I'm coming back for you. As she watched me, tears began filling her eyes. If they spilled over, if I saw her cry, I knew my mask would dissolve and she would see the terror I was feeling. So I forced myself not to see her anymore. I focused all my thoughts on James and the fight that was to come. Swiftly I turned to leave, refusing to look at any of my family's expressions. We were as prepared as we were going to be, and without another moment's hesitation, I ran out the door with Carlyle and Emmett right behind me. As we climbed into the Jeep, I was consumed by everything that was happening. We were driving into the night to kill a monster, and I was leaving the only thing that mattered, my love, my existence, in Alice's hands. The chase. The only thing keeping me sane as we drove away from Bella was knowing Alice was with her. I figured having someone who can literally keep an eye on her future is probably even better than being watched by a mind reader, though it was increasingly hard to convince myself of that fact. 138, as the miles between us grew. Not being able to touch her, feel her presence, count her heartbeats was excruciating. If there'd been any other way I wouldn't have left her side, but the moment I heard James behind us, I knew they'd all been right. He would follow us, assuming Bella was with me just as we had anticipated. Our plan was to lead him north, possibly up into Canada, until we were sure we were far enough away that Victoria would not be able to help him once the fight began. With Esme and Rosalie leading her around, James would be nothing more than a pile of ashes before she realized anything was wrong. Her mind had been fairly subdued during our encounter in the field, so there was no way of knowing how strong her reaction would be when she eventually realized what had happened to James. I hoped, though, that her ties to HIMS were as weak as Lawrence had been, and she would simply go her own way. Maybe she'd grown tired of wandering as well, and would join Laurent in Denali. We'd gone almost 100 miles before Carlyle spoke aloud, though I'd been listening to him go over the details of our plan since we left the house. He was meticulous, thinking of every aspect of where we were going and what we were doing. Except the actual kill. Even in his mind he refused to picture it. Emmett's mind, however, was crystal clear on that front. Once we were far enough away from Forks, we'd search for a place secluded enough that no one would hear or see the fight or its aftermath. Ideally, we'd find a forest miles away from any town. We'd leave a trail leading off into the woods, letting him believe we'd continued on foot, then backtrack and wait for him to arrive. I hoped Emmett and I would be able to finish him off without having to involve Carlyle, though of course he would fight if he thought for 1 second either of us was in any danger. "Can you still hear him?" Carlyle asked, breaking my train of thought. "Yes, but it's getting fainter. He's falling behind, though I'm positive he's capable of keeping up with us," I said, suddenly worried. "Do you think that's a bad sign?" "Not necessarily. He's a tracker, so he knows he'll be able to find us even if he stays miles back." "You said this was a game to him. Maybe he's trying to make it more interesting, maybe," I mumbled, trailing off and trying not to let my mind wander to other more disturbing possibilities. I focused even harder on James's mind, determined not to lose my hold on his voice. He was still thinking of nothing but Bella, her scent at the forefront of his thoughts. It was agonizing, listening to him think about Bella and how much he would enjoy killing her. I felt as if she were being defiled simply by being in his mind, and everything in me wanted to tear her from his thoughts and protect the perfection of her image. Over the next 100 miles, James's voice came in and out of focus. I'd hear him just long enough to know he was still behind us, then as quickly as I'd caught it, it would disappear. I couldn't hear anything specific about his plan, almost like he was guarding part of his thoughts from me. It was extremely disconcerting. After several more miles, I completely lost his voice. Oddly enough, right before he was silenced that final time, I thought I heard a faint laugh. It sounded almost smug, like he knew it was the last thing I would hear. I thought I'd been very careful not to let on to my special talent, but with a slight panic I wondered if somehow he'd figured it out. "Carlyle. I can't hear him anymore," I finally admitting, feeling defeated. "Do you want me to slow down? Let you try to pick it up again?" 139. "Yes. No. I don't know." I shook my head, frustrated and worried and wishing more than anything that Bella was there to calm my fears. My hands were clenched tight and I closed my eyes, trying to decide the best course of action. "I'm going to call Esme," I decided. "I want to make sure everything is going according to plan on their end. Then we'll decide what to do about James."